So hi everyone, and thank you again for joining us for the launch of Shaping Perspectives and Bridging Divides, a Settlement and Integration Sector Awareness Communications Toolkit. My name is Melanie and I'm the Communications Lead at ERASA. I would like to take a moment to acknowledge that I currently am in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. I'm grateful for the peace and friendship treaties. As an immigrant to Canada, I arrived without a deep understanding of the histories, cultures, and rights of Indigenous peoples. And over the years, I've had the opportunity to learn and reflect, and this learning is still ongoing. So I would invite all of us to reflect on our relationship with the land and the Indigenous peoples who have cared for it for generations. Conversations around immigration are shifting, and it's important to communicate the impact of our work in ways that inform, engage, and resonate with our communities. This toolkit that we will talk about today was created to provide you with practical strategies, key messages, and ready-to-use resources. And today we'll be hearing from Marie Lebras and Sarah Simpson at National Public Relations, who created the toolkit, and we're very lucky to have them with us here. Marie is the Director of Data Intelligence, and Sarah is Senior Director of Corporate and Public Affairs. And you can find their bios in the chat, or you will find them shortly. Before I turn it over to Marie and Sarah, I just wanted to thank them for all their work. This initiative was put forward by the ERASA board, and I also wanted to thank the Communications Hub for providing valuable feedback during the development of the toolkit. Okay, so I will stop there. And with that, let's get started. So Mary, over to you.
Thank you so much, Melanie, and thank you everybody for being here. It's such a pleasure to get to connect with everyone and present the toolkit to you all, and hopefully answer any questions or have a discussion about it as well as we go through. So we'll pull up some slides in a moment to do that and take a little bit of a walkthrough of what is the toolkit, what's in it, and highlight some of the resources that we think are helpful and might inform a discussion afterwards. We're happy to take questions as we go or at the end. So feel free to, I think as Yasmin has helpfully written, raise your hand or write questions in the chat and we can have a discussion about them, but really looking forward to being able to talk through with everyone about the best ways to use this and how you intend to use the toolkit, because that's really a key part of what it's about, is making sure that it's useful for all of you. So with that, I'll pull up some slides that we'll walk through. But Sarah, is there anything that you'd like to add before we get started?
No, I'll just say hello to make sure everybody can hear me, but it's lovely to be here and looking forward to the discussion.
Super. Hopefully everyone can see that and we're in full screen. So as introduced by Melanie, the toolkit is called Shaping Perspectives and Bridging Divides, and that's really the core principle of the toolkit, is a means to help raise awareness of the integration and settlement sector and give you some tools to be able to do that and to communicate that. So first off, what is the toolkit? In really practical terms, it's a collection of resources and key messages, but beyond that, what it's intended to be is really provide you with practical communications guidance and frameworks. So that might be, and some of this we'll walk through today, but that might be ways to address misinformation and disagreement about immigration and perceptions about the sector. It might also be ways to think about who we are as a sector and how to express that and how to communicate. It also includes some example messaging, so tailored to different audiences that might be of interest to you as integration and settlement organizations. So that might be media, that might be your clients, it might be government officials that you're speaking with, as well as answers to frequently asked questions so that you have something to go back to and build a response off of, either to questions that come up a lot or questions that are sort of tangentially related to that, and these can then serve as a resource to build off of. But we were really grateful to be able to come to some of you who I know are here today to get a little bit of input on what are some of these frequently asked questions that come up and answers that might be helpful to provide to them. So that's some of what's in the toolkit, as well as some social media templates to help articulate some of this that are in development and will be coming up in the future. But to take a step back, and Melanie sort of seeded this idea for us a little bit, I want to talk about the context for the toolkit. So some of how this work came to be was really centered around the now ongoing federal election, the accumulation of other provincial elections in Atlantic Canada, and what that means for perceptions of immigration, and especially for the work that you do as integration and settlement organizations. So to sort of take us back to the beginning, this work started with a landscape analysis where we looked at what do the conversations around immigration look like, and broke them down according to different provinces, and saw slight variations between the different provinces, but ultimately something that I'm sure you're all keenly aware of and probably feeling every day, which is a little bit of a shift towards some negativity that ultimately isn't just immigration focused, but that folks working in the immigration sector are certainly feeling, and some misunderstanding about what's happening with immigration in Canada today. So the idea of the toolkit is to serve as really a tool to help raise awareness of the great work that you do, and help articulate its value, particularly in a way that can be understood by the different audiences, and particularly in that context of increased negativity. So that's something that we'll talk about today, and what are some of the tools and practices that you can use to handle those sorts of interactions as well. But really thinking with that in mind, of that was the purpose that the toolkit was created with. When we're thinking about the audience for the toolkit, it's really anyone that it can be useful for. So you can think of obviously the communications team at your different organizations, but it could also be frontline staff who are interacting with clients and maybe fielding some of those frequently asked questions from them or from the public. It could be your organization's leadership. It's really up to you and how you see the best use case for it. And that's something that we're really curious to hear about from you, but intended for quite a flexible use. So one of the first pieces of the toolkit is really drilling down into who we are as integration and settlement organizations and as a sector. And so what you'll see within it are some characteristics and some values, and what that means for communications practices. So some of them are listed on the screen here, and are intended as thought starters. You might have other synonyms that come to mind, but these are some of the ones that the toolkit has landed on. So settlement and integration organizations are passionate and dedicated about what they do. So what that means in terms of communications practices is that we're communicating with a certain enthusiasm about what we're doing, try and shed light on the good work that we're doing, and more in the category of things that we don't do. We're not sort of putting down other organizations or the experience of others, for example. Other characteristics are that the organizations are approachable, community-minded, resourceful, open and honest, and how that might manifest in some of the communications practices we use is sharing information that's helpful, not withholding information, or being territorial, making sure that we're sharing information that's useful and that's valuable to our different audiences, and highlighting, for instance, the community work that we do to lean into some of these characteristics. So from there, we've helped develop some messaging, and that you'll find in the toolkit. But one of the key ideas is to always think about you as settlement and integration organizations are the experts, or are among the experts in what you do. And there are a few people who know what you do as well as you do. And so important in thinking about that when you communicate, that there's always an opportunity to step back and think about, how can we communicate this as simply as possible to people who don't necessarily understand as deeply as we do, or as you do what you do. So here on the screen, we've got some example language that can help articulate that. And we'll walk through shortly some examples of a little bit of some do's and don'ts, and some ways of thinking about how to scale back that information and really present it at the simplest, but also the truest level possible. So when we think about integration and settlement organizations, really at the core of what you're doing is helping new immigrants and refugees settle and build a successful life in Canada. And another piece to articulating what you do is really breaking down the kinds of services you're offering and what their value are. So providing free and confidential services that support newcomers in building that lasting connection with their community, and also accessing necessary government and community services as well. But really trying to articulate, what are the services, what are the value that they're offering. So here, as sort of promised, we've got some examples of some maybe more complex language, and then on the right-hand side, some ways that we could simplify expressing them. So a lot of what you might find in the toolkit is ways to especially talk about what is settlement and integration. So here on the left-hand side, for example, we facilitate newcomer clients' integration journeys. Very true. But another way that we might say that is to say we help newcomers to Canada settle into their new communities. So using some of the same language, but thinking of ways that we can make it maybe a little bit more tangible, maybe a little simpler. One thing to think about, for example, too, is we often think about plain language has to mean shorter. That's not necessarily the case. It doesn't have to mean that you would go from something that's a little bit more technical to plain language and that the sentence is going to be shorter. But it's more about, how can we make it as clear and as simple as possible? So a little bit of a myth buster there for you. If we're talking about our service model within the integration and settlement sector, we use a holistic, client-centric service delivery model. Again, absolutely true, and great words. But another way to say that is, our comprehensive services put newcomers' needs first. And that way we're sort of shifting away from a little bit more jargony, a little bit more complex language, towards really what the purpose of the work that we're trying to do is, which is putting newcomers' needs first. And then similarly, we cultivate cross-cultural competency. Instead, could we say, we teach newcomers and community members about different cultures, and sort of articulating the same thing there, but in a way that feels a little bit clearer and a little bit simpler. And so here, another example of some of the messaging that you'll find in the toolkit. And the idea here is really about how we express the impact of our work. So thinking about, as much as possible, are there metrics that you can use? And we'll talk about closer to the end of the session about how do we keep those metrics current, collect them in the first place, and then make sure that we stay up to date with them, because that's just as important as having the metric itself. But the idea here with this messaging is really to be able to express the impact of what we do in sort of real numbers and real time. So these are some numbers that we helped develop for a media pitch at some point in the time that we were developing the toolkit. And so we'll give you a little bit of an idea of what you can do with some of the facts that you might already have about the service delivery that you're doing with your organization. So for instance, it could be, our clients have opened 41 new businesses in the past year, both in urban and rural areas. So showing the value of the services that you've provided and then connecting it back to something that's happening in the community that's beneficial to the clients that you serve, the communities that they live in, the officials who represent that community, and all of the different audiences that we're interacting with. Another one that really tangibly connects the services that you're providing as an organization with then the community impact is this idea that more than half of new clients who received employment counseling through our organization in 2024, for example, a certain percentage of them are now working, and 70% of them in their field or in a related field, which is a really great way of demonstrating that the employment counseling is helpful for achieving or getting employment, and particularly getting employment in a field that they're already trained in and want to be working in. We have some more around healthcare professionals and integrating them into the healthcare sector and the healthcare system in Atlantic Canada. Or another one is permanent residents who are working in the trade sector. So something to think about as we're talking about the impact and value of the work that we do is how do we connect it to issues that our communities care about. So some of the ones that are highlighted in this messaging are supporting the healthcare system and how can newcomers to Canada integrate that system and help make it better. In that last one, we've highlighted construction trade workers to sort of highlight the work that they're doing to help build and maintain homes in a moment where a lot of Canadians are sensitive to their ability to buy and maintain their own homes. And in those first two, more broadly around the economic impact of newcomers to Canada and illustrating the value that they bring by building new businesses and joining the labour market and helping move that forward. So one piece that we know and heard that a lot of member organisations were curious about is how to balance those communications efforts between Eraser and member organisations. And really at the simplest level, the way that the toolkit breaks this down is an idea that Eraser can talk to some of the broader trends, whether that's regional trends and data, maybe it's partnerships and collaborations, sector-wide initiatives, obviously organizational updates that are specific to Eraser, and some of the regional advocacy that's going on. But at a high level, Eraser more focusing on what's happening in the region as a whole and playing that coordinating role that it plays and speaking to what's happening on the whole, and member organizations then being able to focus on the specific work that they're doing in your own local communities and what the needs are in those communities. So in the column of things that member organizations can then take away, it might be more program specific information, local community initiatives and the local needs, as well as a key piece that your organizations can own are client stories and testimonials as well. And then where that Venn diagram sort of meets in the middle is together, Eraser and member organizations can be sharing factual information about immigration. So that might look like some of the messages that we were just talking through of sharing the impact of the work. It might be having the latest information on what's happening around immigration, but collaborating together to share that factual information about immigration and amplify one another's messages. It's not because the toolkit draws this delineation between what's happening at the more regional level and then what's happening at the more local level, that the two sides can't then come together and amplify each other's information and value. So that's a little bit of that idea of who speaks to what and how do we derive the most value from each organization's voices and then help them work together to really raise awareness about what immigration in Canada really means, and especially what work the settlement and integration sector is doing to support that. So included in the toolkit, and one thing to leave you with as we have walked through some of the tools and some of the messaging that's included in the toolkit is this checklist of hopefully some some evocative questions, but questions that we find helpful in thinking about when we're undertaking a communications activity, and that can hopefully help you derive the most use from the toolkit. So one of them is thinking about, have we shared relevant and useful information that helps build an understanding of our sector and its purpose for our audience? So is the information that we're sharing doing that? And if it doesn't, can we come back to the drawing board and think about what would be useful, what would help build an understanding of the work that we do as integration and settlement organizations? Thinking back to that slide with our sort of more technical language and then our plainer language, are we using that plain language that our audience understands, knowing that that could be adjusted for different audiences? If we're talking to government officials and media, maybe one form of language, clients and the public could be another, but ultimately, are we using language that everyone can understand and that they can maybe even repurpose themselves? So if we think about sort of the concept of teaching, are we communicating in such a way that the person that we're communicating with can then carry forward that information and teach it and share it with someone else? Have we communicated in a way that enables them to do that? And then finally, thinking back to some of the characteristics and values that we talked about at the top, is what we've said and shared representative of our sector and who we are as a sector? Are we sort of upholding those characteristics and leaning into them to really demonstrate who we are as integration and settlement organizations? So kind of some 3 questions to ask yourselves as you go maybe through a communications activity or building a communications plan and thinking about, is this doing what we want it to? Those questions can be helpful thought starters for making sure that you're sort of in lockstep with some of those best practices for raising awareness and communicating. And from here, I'll hand it over to Sarah so that we can talk through some of the pieces around more engaging with negative or misinformative conversations and how to navigate those.
Yeah, thank you, Marie. Hi, everybody. So as Marie said, more and more immigration is becoming sort of a topic of conversation, and we're seeing a lot of misinformation. And so I'm going to go through just quickly sort of misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. But I think in terms of sort of geopolitical factors right now and the federal election, immigration isn't as front and center as we thought it might be 6 months ago or a year ago, but it because there's many other things happening to distract from it, but it really still is a topic of conversation there in the States in particular. And so I think that's only going to increase. And as we know, in Canada, often things sort of trickle up. And so we want to make sure the whole goal, and that when ERASA came to us, is making sure we're all repeating the same information and using the same messaging and being really consistent across the region, which is super important. And part of the reason it's important is to combat misinformation and the other forms. And so I'll usually lean toward misinformation, but I do want to highlight these. The World Economic Forum puts out an annual risk report, and they have misinformation on par with climate change and geopolitical wars, essentially, because it affects all of the topics. And so we see these a lot. None of this is going to be a surprise to you, but just for to sort of contextualize, misinformation is the false information that is not intended to cause harm. So misinformation is, you see something and you repeat it to somebody else and you don't have a bad intention, but you have misunderstood. And that's what we see most. And so if I'm referring to sort of the whole spectrum, I'll probably say misinformation, but it can also be disinformation, which is when there's actually manipulated content or something is made up and it's designed to cause damage. It's designed to serve a particular topic or a particular benefit to one group or the other. And so that's kind of imposter content fake content. And then we get into malinformation. And so malinformation is comes from the truth, but then gets warped or exaggerated in order to mislead or cause harm. So that, you know, people misusing statistics in insincere or untruthful ways, leaking information, harassment, and hate speech are also under malinformation. And there is the Government of Canada has some good information on all of those. There's a link at the bottom there, but cyber.gov.ca has a bit more information on each of them. And I think it's something that we're going to continue to see, unfortunately. And you're going to see that in particular when we talk about immigration and settlement. And so how on earth do we combat that? And unfortunately, I don't have an easy solution. You know, the shortest explanation for how we combat that is being really repetitive and really consistent and having the same messaging come from many different sources, which is why it's so important for organizations like yours who are all working simultaneously towards similar goals, but in slightly different regions or slightly different areas. It's more important than ever that everybody's has shared messaging and consistent messaging. And so there are sort of things you can do to address issues and challenges. React is, you know, there's a lot of mnemonic devices, I can never say that word, that we're going to throw at you, but I mentioned this already, repeating the facts. And so we all know that everybody's busy and you see something and, you know, sometimes you might find yourself saying something and think, where did I even read that? Where did that come from? And the more you see something, sort of the more factual it becomes, whether it's a fact or not, or an opinion. And so, you know, they say people need to see something 7 times to remember it. And so we want to make sure that we are repeating over and over again the key messages around immigration and settlement. You know, to Marie's point, in saying things in plain language, nobody's thinking about you as much as you're thinking about you. Nobody's thinking about your day-to-day as much as you think about your day-to-day. And so we do need to repeat things for people over and over again so that they kind of become familiar and then become part of the common belief. Empathy is also really important. And I think that there's empathy just by nature in your work and in your industry. And it's empathy for both sides. And so a lot of times when we're working on sensitive issues or sensitive topics, we'll say hard things are hard. And that sounds almost dismissive, but just acknowledging that, you know, immigration is really complex. There's no perfect way to do it for any one human or any one community. And so acknowledging and having that empathy and understanding that this is a really complex topic and humans are complex. And so it's hard to understand all of the impacts and all of the areas. And so sort of starting from that position of most people do not have ill wishes upon others. It comes from a place of fear or concern, or sort of where is that misinformation or misunderstanding coming from? Additional and alternative information. This is reference. So it's, if somebody does come with, you know, this is where we're talking about issues and challenges. So preconceived notion or misunderstanding or myths that we want to dispel about immigration and settlement. Rather than just tell them that they're wrong, it's always better to have more information to point to. And especially if we're dealing with misinformation, you know, where they have facts or numbers, the more detail, the better, the more sources you can point to. And that is kind of going to dovetail a little bit with the next one, which is credibility. And so a source that one person finds credible, somebody else may find less so. So again, you know, it all ties together, but repeating the facts and repeating the information from multiple sources is your best way. When we look at credibility these days, it has really changed who people find credible. So less and less people want to be hearing from the CEO of an organization or from a politician. and more they want to be hearing from someone on the ground who's experienced it. But there's also a balance. You can kind of put it in a graph, the expertise and the familiarity of a source. And so, is it a nurse? Is it a professor? Is it a CEO of a pharmaceutical company? Depending on who it is, they're going to give more time and give more credibility to different people. And for you folks, of course, confidentiality always has to be considered. So especially if we're using examples or developing content, we also need to make sure that we're considering the confidentiality of anybody that's involved and the organizations. And then finally, timeliness. Everything is faster than it's ever been, on top of there just being more of it in terms of information and stories and sharing. And so it is really important to be able to respond quickly, but you always want to balance that with accuracy, and being thoughtful. So the more we have key messaging and positioning and tone and things like that ready to go, hopefully that helps us with timely responses, like Marie said, when we have frequently asked questions. So you have something in your back pocket when something comes up that is a common question or a common misunderstanding, and you can point to it or share it or repeat it, or however it is that you want to get it out there. We can keep going, Marie. Thank you. And so there are different ways we might hear complaints or criticisms or misinformation. And it's important to think about how you're going to respond to those in advance. So it might be a direct complaint. It might be somebody reaching out in person, on the phone, or coming to your office, in which case, obviously, you're going to respond and talk to them. An online complaint on social media or online is a little more complicated. A good idea is often to have social media guidelines or digital guidelines that your organization can have, so that you have a plan for when you see something. So if and we talk a little bit about how to respond to each of these in the toolkit. But if someone is commenting with profanity or personal attacks, it may be your policy to remove or hide those comments on social media, for example. And it's helpful if you do that to have something to point to say, well, actually, we have social media guidelines that say we're going to do this. So it wasn't just a one-time thing where we decided to hide this person's comments. I think it's a really gray area, and responding to any kind of negativity there's always a risk you're going to call more attention to it or make things worse. And so you have to really do an assessment of how much damage is this doing? Is it false information? Is it a personal attack on someone, or is it someone's opinion? And sometimes you can, especially online, sort of things will self-regulate a little bit. Someone will comment in response to that, but not always. And sometimes you have to respond and take action. And so it's a really complicated thing that can take a surprising amount of time when, it stems from a simple Facebook comment or something like that. And so thinking about that and how to do it is really important. Some of the ways we think about it in particular, I think, Marie, if you want to go to the next slide. We have VBE. These are sort of some techniques for responding to people, more in person, but I think the premise applies anywhere. And so the examples are sort of as you might speak, or they might be a little bit more formal than you might speak, but at first you want to acknowledge what's being said. Now, if someone's being particularly rude or particularly aggressive, you may not want to start with "thank you for sharing your perspective." Obviously, all of this has to be considered in the particular space and in the particular example. But acknowledge is really what I was getting at when I was talking about hard things are hard. Like, yes, there is a housing shortage right now, and it is really hard for people. And we know that that's complicated. And, then you kind of bridge to what you want to share, which is, it's important that we think about the big picture. And what we know is that newcomers to Canada are actually contributing to building more housing. And here's my stat on educating. So if you think about that, acknowledge, bridge, educate, what it's really doing is making sure that you're in the right place to have the conversation in the right space. And so thinking about how to de-escalate. So those in acknowledge, there's a lot of I statements there. And that's on purpose, because what we're not saying is you're saying that the sky is purple and that is wrong. What you're saying is, I understand that you think the sky is purple, and here's how I'm going to tell you that it's not. That's a very simple analogy for very complicated things, but that's sometimes just helpful to paint the picture.
Thanks, Sarah. And I think from here, we'll take it into just some final thoughts on using the toolkit. So one thing that we know is really important is staying current. So when we're trying to sort of more neutrally share information about what your organizations are doing, or in this situation that Sarah was just describing of the acknowledge, bridge, and educate, it's important that we have current information to share and back up what it is that we're saying. One important note on staying current is it doesn't have to mean that you're sharing the latest information from yesterday. It has to be what's feasible for your organization, what's feasible for the sector to collect. And so it might be that that's information that's looking back at the last year, and that's perfectly acceptable as staying current. It's important to have the information that's ultimately accessible to you, that you're able to collect or get your hands on, and that is as truthful as possible, but not something that has to come from, as we said, yesterday. But so the toolkit has some pointers on places that you might look for either building out this information right now and then keeping it current. So that might include annual reports, it might be news articles will often either have information baked into them, or they could be linking you to other primary research from organizations that you might be familiar with. There's also then data and statistics from maybe IRCC or Statistics Canada, other research organizations that you might know, like the Conference Board of Canada or the Migration Policy Institute. And then also keeping track of federal and provincial communications around immigration that might have some helpful information that you can then take advantage of and use to educate about the work that you do. But important to sort of keep track of that. And one final one that we haven't mentioned is Eraser also keeps a spotlight on data that has information that you can take advantage of there as well. And another important piece in using the toolkit is thinking about how you measure success. And success can be a really varied term and might look different for every one of you that's using the toolkit. But ultimately, the goal of the toolkit and the activities that you'll be undertaking with the help of the toolkit is, as we've conceived of it, to help raise awareness of the great work that you do as settlement and integration organizations and the broader impact and context for immigration in Canada. So some ways that you might measure the success of how you're communicating that is by keeping track of some of the goals that you probably already are tracking, like your service goals. So it might be numbers of clients served, or if we're looking at those messages, the number of clients who maybe you provided employment services to and who then were able to access employment or access especially employment in particular fields. So keeping track of their service goals to see if there's any moving of the needle. Are you serving more clients, for example, or are you having more demand for language training or access to certain government services as a way of seeing what sort of impact our communications having? It might also be looking at the government relations activities that you're undertaking, or more broadly, the partnerships that you have. So are you developing more partnerships with local or with regional organizations? And could that be coming from the communications work that you're doing? And then other things to look at include website traffic. So is there more traffic to your organization's websites, or changes in what that traffic looks like? Are people maybe spending more time there, or are they really digging deep on a particular topic that's covered on your website? And can that be coming from the communications that you're doing? Similarly, measuring your social media. So that could be growth in followers, growth in engagement, but also some of the more qualitative aspects of it. How are people engaging with your social media? Are they leaving questions or comments? Is there more discussion? And what does that discussion look like? And then finally, looking to traditional media as well. Is there more or perhaps better coverage of the integration and settlement sector? And are we helping to build understanding of the work that you're doing through traditional media? So that might be online coverage, as well as what happens on broadcast, so TV and radio, for example, and that as a channel to the public and to some of the other audiences that you have. So all things to take into consideration as you're thinking about what is the success of the communications that you're taking on with the help of the toolkit. And I think that wraps up this sort of quick and speedy overview of the communications toolkit. It's, at least we think, sort of a healthy collection of different resources, to Sarah's point, mnemonic devices and frameworks that you can use, as well as key messages to help really articulate and break down what it is that you're doing. And hopefully a helpful tool both in the current political context and beyond to help speak to what it is that you do. I think from here sorry, you go ahead.
No, I was just going to say we're happy to answer any questions if there's any.
Thank you both. I will just jump in now just to thank Mary and Sarah. And yes, any questions from participants would be welcome. It's a great opportunity to have both Sarah and Mary here with us. So you can either raise your hand and mute, or put your questions in the chat as well. And we will be sharing the toolkit also by email to all of you, so that you will have it. But yeah, in the meantime, if you have any questions, I could start with one. So when people receive the toolkit, what is one maybe easy step or first thing that you would encourage them to do with the toolkit?
That's a great question. I think a first recommendation would be to really make it your own. So thinking about some of those messages that we were looking at of, we've served X many clients and this has been the result. Looking at what that means for your organizations and thinking about what is it that we've done, I think is a really helpful first step, and can kind of then help build into all of these different activities that the toolkit gives some guidance on.
Yeah, I would say anytime we're doing something like this, and it was really helpful for Melanie to bring the Communications Hub folks together so we could hear what's useful. We hope that this is useful. We think that it is useful. Arisa will think that it is useful. It is only useful if you know what's in it and if you read it and if you use it. But I think it can be useful in a number of ways. You know, if you're in a pinch and just need to ground yourself a little bit and say, okay, this is a bit of a stressful situation. What do I need to remember? I think it's also good as an onboarding tool. If you have new people coming in and you want them to know, you know, how do we talk about ourselves as an organization? What is our tone? How do we want to present ourselves? It's really helpful that way. So I would say similar to Marie, but familiarize yourself with it, you know, print it out, chop it up. It doesn't have to be read cover to cover. It can be in pieces. Everybody's busy. So we try and make it useful and not too lengthy. And so hopefully you find that's what you find.
Thank you. Those are great points. I like that way to use the toolkit.
Mm-hmm.
Any questions, comments, feedback from what you've heard? I see some comments in the chat. People are really thankful. So that's awesome. And think that it's very helpful already. So it's amazing. I don't see any other questions though, nor any hands up. So
Thank you. Well, we'll say too, thank you for all the work that you're doing. I know it's really important work. It's not always easy work. And like I said, humans are complex and you know, if you think about just moving streets or apartments or houses to a new community, it's complex. And then as you scale up, you know, the complexity scales up too. And so, but it is really important and it's so special for our communities to be able to have people from different cultures. And so thank you all for your work as well.
well, thank you. And thank you again, Mary and Sarah, for that great presentation. Thank you to the interpreters as well. We really appreciate your work. So again, we hope this toolkit helps you communicate the impact of your work. We will share it by email. Also, just to note that an online version will be available in the coming weeks, along with, as Marie's mentioned, visual templates to support your outreach. So stay tuned for that. And before you go, we'd love your feedback. So if you could please fill out our survey. I'm just going to put it now in the chat. Here we go. This really helps us improve our events and tailor any next webinars that we do. So yeah, with that, I mean, look for the evaluation survey also in your inbox, as well as the toolkit. And thanks again, and we look forward to seeing how you put the toolkit to use. So enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. Bye.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks very much.